Hey, what's up guys? On this week of Donny Builds, we're going to check out this walnut desk. Let's get started. Alright guys, I'm really excited about this build, not only because it's walnut, but I actually got to work with a new lumber yard. I'll throw some information about them down in the description below, but they sourced these awesome walnut boards for me. So the first thing to do was to organize those out and decide which pieces I wanted to make up my desktop and which pieces were going to make up the legs. And then we could work on milling. So far we have cut down our walnut. This is going to make up our desk top. Total width is going to be 28 inches, so we've got a little bit of extra play there. And then these stacks are going to make up our leg blanks. Next up, we're going to get, I can't decide if it makes more sense to try to glue up the whole leg blank, or actually scratch that. It's better to cut them to rough length, glue the individual smaller blanks up because you got more control. You don't have to fight the open tom of the glue as badly. So that's the move. Don't do it the other way. Cut them up and then glue them. Don't try to glue the whole thing because that just sounds like a nightmare. And now with my plan of attack all mapped out, I could work on getting all these individual planks ripped to the rough length and getting those glued up, and then we'll get those milled. That way they're perfectly square. And with the leg blanks glued up and off to the side, I could turn my attention to the desk top. Again, this is going to be about 28 inches wide, so we used 5 boards, and we got everything glued up, marking it out with dominoes first. Of course, you don't have to use dominoes. You could use a doweling jig, you could use biscuits, or you could even check out Rockler's new bead block system, and that would do just as well. Quick note here, you will see me jumping back and forth between tasks. You saw me gluing up the tabletop, now you see me milling up the leg blanks. I'm trying to maximize my amount of time in the shop and get the most done as I can, so while one thing's gluing up, I turn my attention back to another part of the process and keep working. Now I realize filming in this order can make things a little difficult to follow along, so I'll do my best to make it simple, but I do think this is an accurate representation of what it looks like when you're working on projects. You can't always just stop and wait forever for one part of the piece to be done so you can continue working on it. Try to be efficient, get the most bang for your buck, and that's how you can make money and improve your workflow. Now that I got these leg blanks all milled up and square, I could call on my domino a second time to get them pulled together. I also whipped together a quick little jig here, just a couple of scrap pieces of ply, screwed down to the desktop. This allowed me to set up the boards both vertically and horizontally in order to plunge those mortises, and jigs just make life way easier, so I'm kind of making it a personal goal to create more jigs, even rudimentary ones. That way we can improve workflow. With the leg blanks figured out, I could turn my attention back to the desktop, which was done gluing up. I got that out of clamps, scraped off any of that excess glue from the squeeze out with a sharp chisel, and then started a rough sanding just to level out those ridges with 80 grit. It wasn't until about a few minutes in that I realized my dust hose actually disconnected and had a lot of walnut sawdust all over the place. Gotta pay more attention to that. Alright, we're moving along really well. We've got our desktop all glued up. Now this is going to be an L desk, so we're going to cut it to length. We're going to have one corner that's going to be 40 inches and the other corner is going to be 55 inches. We're going to joint those in the middle using a miter joint, and we're going to use the Festool Domino knockdown hardware to pull that together. Let's go ahead and break out the track saw, get this cut to length, and then we'll go ahead and get the plywood cut to length that we're going to use for our filing cabinet. Yeah, so everything I just said was the original plan. I made a couple cuts, got things set up, and I started to realize this was not looking how I wanted it to. Alright, so we've ran into a situation. Originally when I mocked this up to show the client, I had this length being 40 inches and this one being 55, so what I just talked about before we cut things. That measurement in my mind and when I drew it on paper was from the outside corner out. But in actuality, what I wanted it was from the inside corner and out. That way the desk feels this big.
So this corner to that corner is 55 inches, and this corner to that corner is 40 inches, which feels like the right size. But if you notice, there's a huge gap right here. If we were to miter this and bring it in, we'd lose a lot of material, and each side of this desk would feel really small. The same idea if we were to butt joint, if we pulled this up to where it was flush on this side, we'd lose a lot of desk over here, and vice versa. So I'm trying to think about, what's the best way to fix this issue, because we always run into issues. The difference is when we figure out solutions. So what I'm thinking is, I've got some extra stock here. I'm going to mill this down, cut it into lengths, panel it up, or glue it up into a panel, and I can fill in this square with this lumber. Now the walnut's all from the same stack, so it'll have the same relative variation to it. It shouldn't stand out too badly. And then I was touching base with the client to see if he wanted to leave it square and come out, or if we wanted to cut it at an angle and kind of make it diamond shaped. That way, since this isn't going to be going in a corner, people will be walking this route, and that way there's not as much protrusion. Either way is going to be fine. I still need to glue this up to the panel. We'll see what direction he wants to go in. But again, this is a good example. We're going to run into headaches, we're going to run into problems, but we got to persevere and we got to find solutions. Every problem we run into is an opportunity to find a solution. So don't be discouraged, keep after it. And just like that, we're back in business. If you guys like following a channel that doesn't hide mistakes, instead points them out and finds solutions, then consider subscribing, like this video, and share it with a friend. Really helps out the channel, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Anyway, with that disaster averted, we could get back to plan and get our plywood cut down, drill some pocket holes, and assemble our filing cabinet. The client and I talked about it, and we also decided it'd probably be a good idea to give this filing cabinet a toe kick. Just a little something to lift it off the ground, that way when you're pulling that lower drawer that's weighed down by files, you weren't scraping against the carpet the whole time. Since this is plywood, we just did a couple more pocket hole screws, added some glue, and secured that down. Then it was time for a weight test. So after struggling a good amount, I flipped it over and gave it the old sit test. Checked out just fine. The next day we could take our retrofitted square piece and line it up with our other panels and start to see what this L desk is going to look like. I was really happy to see that the shape was coming together well and the seams were looking really tight. Again, we're using the Fez tool connector set to pull these together. It's knockdown hardware, should make it really easy to connect and disconnect these pieces at will, which will make it a lot easier to move around because otherwise it'd be kind of impossible. Now, I do want to touch on this connector kit, but I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail because the likelihood is the people who use this know it a lot better than I do. But basically, there's a drilling guide that you use to drill through the wood into the mortise that you already made using the domino, and then you have a whole bunch of knickknacks and doodads to connect it. The first of which being this guy that drops right in and gets pinned in place using this black fork-like shape. A couple whacks of a mallet gets that nice and flush. On the opposite side, there's a metal part that drops in and has a threaded insert to which you install this piece and they connect. Now this is supposed to catch and pull it tight. I think this hardware kit is designed for a lighter material, something that's not as heavy as a desk, because I had to use clamps to pull it tight. But then after putting the dominoes in the mortises and back out and in, as I was moving around the table and rearranging things, I found that it was a much easier fit once things got loosened up. So these will lock it in place, but they won't necessarily pull the joint tighter, at least not on a piece this size. Now, maybe you noticed this before, or maybe you didn't, but the two leaves for the L-shaped desk did have a little bit of a bow in it, and I wanted to address that and keep that from happening long term. So we're going to install what are called C-channels. Basically, all these are extruded pieces of steel. I drilled holes through them and then made those holes oversized so that the bolts could move around. Hit them with a little bit of black spray paint, that way they were nice and sleek. And then on the underside of those leaves, I routed out a groove to drop this in flush. I actually started using my trim router for this with a 1/4 inch shank. Do not do that. That shank actually broke, believe it or not. Thankfully, I wasn't hurt. It didn't fly off anywhere. It just gave. So I switched over to my big boy router, used this surfacing bit to hollow out and flatten that middle area, and then I could drop these C-channels in place and mark for the threaded inserts. Putting in these threaded inserts and securing the C-channel to the bottom of the desk and pulling that steel rod tight helps to eliminate any bow or movement that the wood would have over time. It's not going to keep it 100% flat forever because wood movement's inevitable, but it definitely helps. I did the same thing for the legs in the sense of I drilled through, marked for threaded inserts and attached them, as well as the filing cabinet. It's the exact same process, so I'm not going to show it again because this is already a super long video. But at this point, I was really excited with the progress and I wanted to see what this looked like all put together. Now I'm about 215 pounds and I laid on this thing and it did not budge at all. Super sturdy. Once we had the top kind of figured out, again, we could jump back over to the filing cabinet and start getting our drawer boxes made. I'm making these drawer boxes like I make all of my drawer boxes out of 1/2-inch Baltic birch plywood with glue and brad nails. I know a lot of guys will sometimes cut their bottom panel perfectly square in order to pull their walls into square. I usually don't have an issue with square walls because I cut the sides parallel to one another so they come square already. So I'll cut the bottom panel oversized and then just follow it up with a flush trim bit to give a nice clean finish. Once I had those all wrapped up, I could start getting them installed into the filing cabinet. We've talked about drawer slides before. They make jigs for these, but you really don't have to have one. I just use a spacer block, in this case a 1/2-inch piece of plywood. I do recommend getting a self-centering drill bit. I'll throw a link to one down below, but they're really handy and it keeps your drawer slide from wandering on you when you go to drive your screw. As for attaching the drawer box itself, sit that same sheet of plywood down to get it off of the bottom of the cabinet. That way there's no friction when you pull your drawer open. Pull the male pieces of the drawer side out a little bit and secure them one screw at a time, pulling out the cabinet a little bit at a time to get to that next screw. Finally, take the cabinet all the way out and drive in that third and final screw. Pretty simple process, and then it's just rinse and repeat from there. If you've watched any Donogram build videos before, you know I love a chamfer profile. And since this was going to be a clean, dark, and modern desk, I went ahead and added that chamfer profile all along the legs and the top surface. I did this after gluing up, which meant that because of the ball bearing, I could not get a nice clean edge on the inside, but a little bit of chisel work got this totally taken care of. I wanted to provide a little bit more stability where the desktop connected. So I added some angle iron along with threaded inserts and screws on oversized holes to kind of bring everything coplanar and just stabilize this area a little bit more. This will also open up the room for some cable management ability. It'll be able to hide the grommets as well as the cord running from this plugin. With the desktop in a pretty good spot, I could turn my attention back over to the filing cabinet and work on those details. Those details being the drawer fronts. I like to make my drawer fronts out of a single panel that I've glued up. That way when you cut the drawer fronts out, the transitions are a little less jarry. I did pick up a nifty little clamp from Rockler that attaches to your top clamp, and you can put downward pressure to prevent the panel from bowing up, which is pretty sweet. Once I got those cut off screen, I used a little bit of hot glue and a spacer on the bottom, then eyeballed the spacing on the top to get those drawer fronts connected.
That's good.
To be clear, when I add these, I don't just leave it at hot glue. I'll put a couple clamps on and then drive panhead screws through the back to secure everything nice and tight. The next day, I could start getting the hardware attached. This is just clean, simple, black modern hardware. Should tie in really well with the grommets and the angle iron on top. I did have to do a lot of individual measuring and drilling for these just because a jig wouldn't have worked because it was a different size drawer front for each drawer, but a little bit of patience got this done. With that out of the way, we could turn our attention to doing some final sanding, working our way through the grids on the legs as well as the desktop. And of course, a little hand sanding just to round everything off and get it ready for finish. The finish we decided to go with on this project is called Rubio Monaco. You guys have seen me use this before. It's a really nice wipe-on finish. It does great things with walnut. I decided to finish the components separately. That way it wasn't awkward having to be on my back and getting the underside of the desk and both sides of the legs. Just a lot easier to do it in separate components and then work on assembly. Then, once that finish was applied, we were ready for that B-roll. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this week's video. Thank you so much for following along. This was quite the project. We tried a bunch of new techniques and run into a lot of difficulties, but we persevered and we got it done, and the results turned out perfectly. Thanks so much, and until next time, get out there and start your own project. Hey, one take a piece. This is pretty good.